Thank you, Speaker. It's always an honor to be able to stand in this House and represent the views of my party and the NDP, and also the views of the good people of Miss Cochrane. And specifically on this bill, Bill number 7. And I'd like to read the official title first. An act to enact the Burden Reduction Reporting Act 2014 and the Partnership for Jobs and Growth Act 2014. And the title's got, all the right words. Burden reduction. Business likes to hear that because business is burdened by a lot of regulations. And partnerships for jobs and growth. Again, those are things that business likes to hear. And from that, I'd give the title, the official title, top marks. Really good title. And then we go to the unofficial title, which is a better business climate. Once again, great marks. The title, great marks. And just to clear the confusion, if there's any confusion, we are going to support this bill, by the way. But we do have to read farther than the title, because one thing we've learned from this government, they are really good at the great title. And then sometimes when you read the bill farther, which is our job, and you realize that what the bill says and what the title says are two different things, the reason they put the really good titles is that so they can say, well, how could you vote against something like that? But they're basing that on the title. And that's why it's important when you're in government and you have a really thin bill, you need a really good title. That's really important. Everyone at home should remember that. If the bill is really small, a big title is really important. It's got to get all the catchy words like partnership, growth, jobs, burden reduction. Really important. So the next thing we're going to look at this bill is the explanatory notes. And that's basically for the folks at home. Explanatory notes is kind of like the Coles notes of what this bill is about. If you don't want to read all the legal stuff, which we do, but if you want to get a quick read of what this bill is about, you check out the explanatory notes. Very important. So this bill's got two parts. Two main parts. Schedule 1 is the Burden Reduction Reporting Act part. Again, very important to business. Schedule 1, and I'll read the explanatory notes because they're pretty interesting actually. Schedule 1 enacts the Burden Reduction Reporting Act 2014, which requires the Minister of Economic Development, Employment and Infrastructure to publish an annual report with respect to actions taken by the Government of Ontario to reduce burdens. So basically this is a piece of legislation that forces the government to produce a report. That's something the government could do without a specific piece of legislation. It doesn't really say what the government's going to do to reduce the burden, or exactly, for some people who are worried that regulations, good regulations are there to protect the populations. For those who are worried that some good regulations will be gutted, it doesn't say how that's not going to happen either. It's basically a report. So, is a report good? Sure, a report's good. Does it warrant the brouhaha of the great title? Not so sure. Not so sure, Speaker. We're talking about a report. We're passing legislation for a report. But there's a second part to the bill. Which may be perhaps, let's hope, much stronger than the first part, Speaker. So the second part enacts the Partnerships for Jobs and Growth Act, which states that the Minister of Economic Development, Employment and Infrastructure may, not he shall, or not he must, but he may, prepare plans with respect to the development of clusters. As part of the preparation of a plan, the minister must consult, there's a must, that's good, as he or she considers advisable with persons or entities that have an interest in the development of the cluster. The plan must contain specified items, including the objectives and intended outcomes of the plan and performance measures. The minister is required to review the plan and make public a report, another report, with respect to the results of the review. The minister is given various regulation-making powers with respect to the plans. So we're talking about clusters, and clusters are a good thing. We've got the high-tech cluster in Waterloo, a cluster that a lot of people in my region, we have several. Actually, right in Temiskaming Shores, close to Temiskaming Shores, because we are the biggest in Northern Ontario, one of the biggest agricultural areas, we have an agricultural service cluster in Temiskaming Shores, in that area, around Earlton and New Liskeard, because whenever farmers in Northern Ontario, Northeastern Ontario, or Northwestern Quebec need parts or service for their equipment, they go to Temiskaming Shores or Earlton. That's where all the dealers are. That's an agricultural service cluster. That's where there's a lot of elevators. Minister of Northern Development and Mines was just in my region, and I'm sure he appreciated how much agriculture is there, and that area, those elevators, those dealerships, service people, they service the whole Northeastern Ontario and Northwestern Quebec. So that's a cluster. A lot of people don't think of it that way, but that is what it is. And it developed, I'd say, autonomously. So it, as many other clusters did as well. So if we use that as an example, I'm not sure how this bill is going to help them or hurt them. Because in most cases, clusters develop for reasons of geography, or the people are there, or in case of Waterloo, because there was one or two companies and an excellent universities, and that's why they developed. So I'm not sure with this bill, and we're not sure, if this bill is actually leading the charge, or just hooking a caboose on the train and trying to get some mileage out of someone else's work. Because it's not clear what this bill is actually going to do to actually help the cluster effect. Again, it's the title is much stronger than what's actually in the bill. And there's a few clusters, and there's a few things that the government could actually do regarding both parts of the bill. And the first part is reducing burden, and I've got a couple examples in my riding. I have the honor of representing a company in my riding, Mohawk Garnet, and they developed a garnet mine. And garnet, not like gemstone garnet, but sandpaper garnet, like 3M garnet. And one of the very important things about that, it's very noteworthy, it's the only wholly owned First Nation mining operation in Canada. That's incredible. And they started this from scratch. And by chance, I happened to meet the manager of this operation, and I met him a few years ago when I was traveling on behalf of the Federation of Agriculture to the Think North Summit in Thunder Bay. Remember the Think North Summit? Yep, and that's where I met Mr. Bob McMurdy. And I've talked a lot to Bob, and I followed his progression trying to develop this mining opportunity. And he could tell you horror stories about the hoops that he's had to jump through to get this going. And believe me, Mohawk Garnet is not out, the First Nations are not out to break rules. Neither is the management of Mohawk Garnet, but it's issues that could and should be solved very easily. But I would say, what's the word I'm looking for? The attitude of some of the members in the bureaucracy, it's not an attitude of, okay, let's see what we can do to fix this problem, or how can we make sure there's a remedy in place to get this done. The attitude is more, well, you know what? These are the rules, and you are just going to have to sit tight till we get there. And that is one of the things that has to change. And I don't see, and I think that's what government or what business is hoping for when they read titles of bills like this. But when you actually read what is or what isn't in the bill, it's not the same as the title. And at least with this bill, and I will give credit for where credit is due, at least what's in this bill isn't exactly opposite of what's in the title, or what the title is. That has happened in this legislature, in this last government. But at least with this bill, what's in the bill somewhat represents what was in the title, as opposed to the fighting fraud bill, where basically they were saying they were going to lower insurance rates, but by doing, and how they were doing that is not allowing victims of accidents to sue. Actually, the title was misrepresented by the bill. In this case, at least, the bill and the title are somewhat along the same vein. Another issue, a very important one to the people of my riding, and when we're talking about clusters, we have, in this province, we have a public transportation cluster. We've got Metrolinx, which moves people, and which is owned by the people of Ontario. We have the ONTC, which has refurbishment shops, which can rebuild cars owned to be a cluster that would benefit the people throughout the province. And what is the minister and what is the premier doing to help that cluster? I dare say, Speaker, not much, if anything at all. We knew the writing was on the wall when ONTC lost the Metrolinx contract to an out-of-company province. And instead of responding with really, okay, what can we do to get this on the road as they were promised, instead of saying, let's see if we can get a strategic alliance, which they were promised with Metrolinx. A strategic alliance is another nice word for cluster. Instead, no strategic alliance. Instead, it's announced that they can, the ONTC shops can refurbish some of the cars and the Polar Bear Express. Well, that is not going to save the ONTC shops. And the ONTC shops and the people who work there are as good, no, they're better, Speaker, than anyone else in the country. And to make matters worse, Speaker, shops that can rebuild and refurbish train cars are in an extremely high demand right now. Extremely high demand to rebuild the rail cars. If you remember the Lac Mégantic disaster, and a lot of those rail cars, they can't be replaced quick enough, so they're having to rebuild them. And passenger cars, there's huge contracts out there to rebuild wheels, which you can do at the ONTC shops, which would make extremely good sense for the people of Ontario. And yet, this government seems paralyzed to actually make decisions that would benefit the people of Northern Ontario, benefit the people of Ontario. Yes, we stopped the sale of ONTC, we stopped the giveaway of those shops, and now it appears that this government is willing to let them die on the vine when there is a huge demand for their services. And I demand that the Premier actually answer the question, is there going to be a strategic alliance with Metrolinx which would benefit all the people of Ontario? So instead of spending time with bills like this and talking about how the Minister of Economic Development could make plans for clusters and should make plans for clusters and may act on those plans, how about this government actually do something with a cluster that they own, that we all own? We own shops that fix rail cars, and we own public transportation that uses, guess what? Rail cars. Seems like a pretty good fit. And yet, while these shops are in huge demand in the rest of North America, in North Bay, we're laying off painters because there's not enough work, because the government will not give the people the tools they need to actually access that work. That's wrong. That's wrong, and on behalf of the people of Northern Ontario, I demand that the government, that the minister, that the premier actually make their plans public, what they need to do, and actually come forth with their promise, provide a mechanism so that the ONTC shops can develop a strategic alliance with Metrolinx and actually benefit all the people of Ontario and actually do what this great title on this bill says. On another issue, Speaker, within this, and let's talk about a single regulation that could be impacted with this. So, I talked about how in Temiskaming Cochrane we have a regional agricultural cluster. And I've listened several times to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change talk about the effects of climate change in the environment. And I have to say that this summer in my riding, we have experienced a summer and a fall that we have never experienced before. I know farmers who have farmed. Roy Schubert, for one, has farmed in my area for 55 years, and he has never left crop in the field. Yet, this fall, it's estimated that about over 50% of the crops in Temiskaming are in the field. And they're going to stay in the field because there's snow. So the people who have crop insurance hopefully will be able to make their payments, because we have never experienced where we had to leave half our crops in the field. But a regulation change that would make a difference in the Crop Insurance Act, and I believe we're going to discuss the Crop Insurance Act in the near future, but a small regulation change, for example, a crop like soybeans, which we haven't grown in Temiskaming for a long time because our weather wasn't conducive to soybeans. But in the last decade or so, and likely due to climate change, soybeans work in our area. But this year, because we've had rain all summer and now snow a month too soon, the soybeans are a loss. But because of a regulation that's across the province, crop insurance won't release the soybeans to a certain date, even though they know it's going to be a loss. Where that impacts the farmers of Temiskaming in a big way is they can't basically do their fall tillage until those soybeans are released. And in Temiskaming, we have to do fall tillage because of our soil, and because when in the springtime, fields that are tilled heat up much quicker than fields that aren't tilled. So if those soybeans aren't released, a lot of the fall tillage won't be done. And in fact, those farmers will be paying for 2 years for this problem. And it doesn't sound like a big issue, but if half your crops are in the field, and you not only can't you get your crops off, but you're not allowed to do your fall tillage in a place where fall tillage is necessary, that regulation needs to be changed. Maybe it has to be more site-specific. And I'm sure they weren't thinking about that regulation when they were talking about this bill, but that's the type of regulation that should be changed. And it needs to be changed very quickly. I don't know if we're going to get it done. I need to talk to the minister again about it. But it's things like that. We have to be much more responsive. I hear on the other side, they talk a lot about climate change. Well, it's time to look actually at the regulations and not just look at the big picture, but look at the small regulations that actually are impacting people now. And that's one that would make a big difference for the people in my riding. And thank you very much, Chief.